The townhouse wasn't a dream. It was a calculation. A step onto the property ladder after years watching rent vanish into the ether. Maplewood Creek, tightly packed starter homes. Vinyl siding reflecting a relentless Florida sun, promising community and equity, albeit with the intimacy of shared walls and the omnipresent gaze of a homeowners association. My unit, hashtag 12B, was a sandwich filling between identical slices, compact but logically laid out. Crucially, it was mine, or mostly mine, shared implicitly with the drywall, the insulation, and whoever occupied hashtag 12A. My name's Ben Carter. Cybersecurity is my trade, designing defenses, predicting threats, maintaining digital hygiene, privacy.security.stable connections. These aren't abstract concepts to me. They're the bedrock of my sanity, hard-won lessons etched deep. 6 years ago, a sophisticated phishing attack bypassed my personal defenses. Not just data loss, compromised financials, stolen identity fragments, months of painstaking digital reconstruction. That violation left scars, a lingering paranoia that made my home network less a convenience, more a fortress. Little did I know the most significant breach wouldn't originate from a shadowy syndicate in Eastern Europe, but from the woman breathing, sleeping, and apparently stewing mere inches away. Her first salvo arrived not even 48 hours after the moving truck pulled away, taped aggressively to my front door, flapping slightly in the humid breeze, was a crisp white envelope. Inside, not a welcoming note, but a typed screed on HOA letterhead, signed with a sharp, judgmental flourish. Carolyn Vance, Treasurer, Mr. Carter, Unit 12B. It began, devoid of pleasantry. It has been noted that your television volume was excessively loud between the hours of 8:17 p.m. and 10:43 p.m. last evening. Maplewood Creek maintains strict noise ordinances. See Bylaw 7, Section C. Further violations will result in formal complaints and potential fines. Consider this your first and only warning. Respectfully, Carolyn Vance. Excessively loud. I'd been watching a documentary, volume barely above conversational level, acutely conscious of the shared wall. This wasn't a request, it was an accusation, and an opening shot fired before I'd even unpacked my damned coffee maker. The feeling wasn't annoyance, it was violation. My sanctuary, already breached by implication. The paranoia tickled. Was she listening through the wall? Carolyn Vance materialized in person later that day, intercepting me as I wrestled a server rack, part of my home lab setup, through the doorway. Late 50s, maybe 60, with hair sprayed into an immovable blonde helmet, lips perpetually pursed as if sucking on a lemon, and eyes that squinted in what seemed like constant, low-grade disapproval. She didn't offer help. She planted herself squarely in my path. "I'm Carolyn Vance," she announced, her voice carrying a nasal, authoritative tone. She stood a foot too close, invading my personal space. HOA Treasurer. Her gaze flickered over the server rack with distaste. "Just so you're aware, noise carries terribly through these walls. We expect consideration." She gestured vaguely towards the rack. "And all that equipment draws a lot of power, I imagine. We monitor utility spikes, you know." Her smile was a brief, thin slash across her face, devoid of warmth. It wasn't a greeting. It was an interrogation veiled as orientation, a warning wrapped in faux neighborliness. My carefully constructed fortress already felt besieged. Carolyn, I swiftly deduced, was the neighborhood's self-appointed sentinel of mediocrity, the official complainer-in-chief. Her grievances were legion, delivered via more aggressive notes or direct, unpleasant ambushes. My cooking smells excessively pungent garlic, ethnic spices, She'd sniff loudly near my kitchen window, my recycling bin placement 3 inches too far left, blocking theoretical pedestrian access. Even the brand of my welcome mat apparently violated some unwritten aesthetic code. She possessed a particular talent for the backhanded compliment that was pure criticism. "Oh, Ben," she'd call out, catching me retrieving mail, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "That strong air freshener you seem to favor. Some residents with sensitivities find it rather irritating." I didn't use air freshener. The phantom scent was purely a product of her imagination, or perhaps malice. Her most persistent, recurring lament, however, involved the perceived inadequacy of her internet connection. She'd corner me by the mailboxes, launch into tirades. "It's impossible," she'd declare, hands on her hips. "Barely loads a simple web page. These townhouses must have ancient wiring, positively prehistoric." Or maybe, she'd add, her eyes narrowing, flicking towards my door with undisguised suspicion. "Some people are just hogging all the bandwidth with their constant streaming and gaming." The first few times, I offered polite, standard troubleshooting advice, the kind I dispense daily in my professional life. "Have you tried rebooting your router? Carolyn, check the lights on the modem. Called your service provider to run a line test?" "Of course, I have," she'd snap back, instantly defensive, insulted by the suggestion she hadn't exhausted basic options. "They're useless, dishonest. They claim everything is perfectly fine on their end." She'd lean closer conspiratorially, but I know better. It's interference. Something nearby is disrupting the signal. The implication hung thick and heavy. I was the interference. My digital life, my home lab, my necessary connectivity, somehow sabotaging her ability to browse dubious news outlets or engage in furious Facebook debates. I attempted, patiently at first, to explain the fundamental principles of separate broadband connections, dedicated bandwidth, the near impossibility of my usage crippling her distinct service line, unless I was actively attacking her network, which I most certainly was not. She waved my explanations away with impatient, dismissive flicks of her wrist. "Oh, you tech people always have complicated excuses. I know what I experience." Logic was an unwelcome guest in Carolyn's echo chamber of grievances. Only blame found purchase there. Her complaints ran parallel to an escalating nosiness. I'd catch the twitch of her blinds when a friend visited. Deliveries were scrutinized from her front window. Then came the sounds. Faint, intermittent scratching against the shared living room wall, usually late at night. Easy to dismiss initially, building settling, pests, the usual creaks of closely packed construction. But the sounds felt localized, persistent, almost rhythmic at times. Right behind where my entertainment center stood, housing my modem, my high-end router, the fiber optic jack, the nerve center of my digital world. Then, my own fortress began showing cracks. My blazing fast, meticulously optimized fiber connection started behaving erratically, not constantly, but intermittently, usually during peak evening hours or late at night. Streaming services would buffer endlessly. Critical work file downloads would stall, forcing reattempts. Latency spikes made online gaming, a rare stress reliever, impossible, annoying, then concerning. My cybersecurity instincts screamed red alert. Had my perimeter been breached despite my precautions? I dove deep. Full network diagnostics, deep packet inspection, firmware, dates, changing complex passwords across the board, reinforcing firewall rules to draconian levels, enabling strict MAC address filtering, whitelisting only my known, trusted devices. The diagnostics revealed anomalies, Unfamiliar devices intermittently appearing in the router's DHCP logs. Cryptic host names, Android, Azenfried, desktop, QRS9B. Unknown device, MAC addresses I didn't recognize. Logging brief connections at odd hours, often when I was asleep or demonstrably away from home. The tightened security, especially the MAC filtering, seemed to work initially. The mystery devices vanished from the logs for a day, maybe two. The connection stability improved slightly. Then, the slowdowns returned, and a new unknown device popped up, somehow bypassing the MAC filter. Whoever this was, they weren't casual. They possessed at least a modicum of technical knowledge, likely employing MAC, spoofing to mimic a permitted device, or exploiting a vulnerability I hadn't yet identified. The game had changed. This wasn't just neighborly annoyance. It felt like a targeted probe. The memory of the scratching sounds returned, now imbued with a sinister quality. The paranoia intensified. I started running network analysis tools, mapping the signal strength and location of the intruder device when it connected. I used a Wi-Fi analyzer app on my phone, slowly walking around my living room, watching the signal bars fluctuate. The signal from the rogue device was weak near my front door, weaker in the kitchen, but near the shared wall. Strong, unnervingly strong. The signal strength indicator peaked, hitting maximum bars, right over the spot where my entertainment center sat. The exact location of my router. The exact spot where I sometimes heard those faint, disturbing sounds. A cold, deeply unpleasant suspicion crystallized in my gut, pushing past disbelief. Could she physically breach the wall? It seemed insane, the stuff of suburban legends. Yet, the data pointed directly there. The sounds, the signal strength, the bypass security. It fit a pattern, however outlandish. One Saturday morning, sleep-deprived and fueled by mounting anger and the chilling implications, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed physical confirmation. Carefully, methodically, I disconnected the complex web of cables snaking behind my entertainment center. Servers.consoles.souls.displays. The router itself. I slid the heavy unit away from the wall, revealing a patch of slightly dusty baseboard and unremarkable painted drywall. Years of accumulated dust bunnies, scattered like guilty secrets. I ran my hands along the cool surface of the wall, scanning visually, feeling for any imperfection. Nothing obvious at first glance. Then, my fingers brushed against it, near the bottom corner, partially obscured by the low-profile fiber optic outlet plate. A tiny, almost invisible irregularity in the paint texture. Not a dent, but a slight, perfectly circular bump. Barely perceptible. My heart hammered against my ribs. Adrenaline surged. Holding my breath, I pressed gently on the anomaly. There was a distinct give, a slight softness beneath the paint. It wasn't solid drywall. She actually did it, fetching a sharp utility knife from my toolbox, my hand surprisingly steady. I carefully scored the paint around the tiny circle. I worked slowly, precisely, peeling back the thin layer of paint and paper. A small plug of drywall, no bigger than a US quarter, came loose in my fingers. Behind it, fluffy yellow insulation padding, and behind that, dark emptiness. A hole, drilled cleanly, purposefully, through the stud bay separating our units, aimed directly towards Carolyn Vance's side. My flashlight beam pierced the darkness within the wall cavity, and there it was. My breath hitched, nestled snugly inside the insulation, positioned strategically less than a foot from where my router usually sat. Broadcasting its powerful signal was a small, white, aftermarket Wi-Fi range extender, a cheap off-brand model, easily recognizable. A thin black power cable snaked from it, back through the drilled hole towards her townhouse. She hadn't just drilled a peephole. She'd performed invasive surgery on our shared property, embedding hardware inside the wall to physically tap into my network at its source. By capturing the signal directly within the wall cavity, she bypassed my external wireless security protocols, leeching my bandwidth before it even fully propagated through my own home. She was, quite literally, hardwired into my digital lifeblood through a hole in the wall. Rage, cold and sharp and utterly consuming, washed over me. This transcended petty theft of service. This was criminal property damage, an unbelievable, intimate invasion of privacy, a brazen act of entitlement fueled by spite and technical ignorance, defying all reason. All her incessant complaints about her bad internet, it was likely garbage, because she was funneling it through this jury-rigged, signal-degrading parasite hidden in the wall. The sheer, calculating audacity was staggering. My first instinct was primal. Storm over there, pound on her door, confront her with the evidence, drag her out, call the police, alert the HOA board, burn it all down. But as the initial crimson wave of fury receded, replaced by the cold, analytical calm of my professional training, a different, more satisfying thought emerged. She wanted my internet that badly. Fine, she could have it. But the terms of service were about to change, drastically. With meticulous care, I replaced the small drywall plug, using a tiny dab of spackle to temporarily reseal the edges. From the outside, it was nearly invisible again. She wouldn't know I'd discovered her secret, not yet. The element of surprise was now my ally. That evening, the house quiet. The only sounds the hum of my servers and the frantic typing of my keyboard. I went to work. Standard network jammers were illegal, indiscriminate, and frankly, lacked finesse. Simply blocking her extender's MAC address again was futile. She'd proven capable of spoofing a new one. I needed a solution that was targeted, persistent, and deeply, personally annoying, educational, even. I unearthed an old Raspberry Pi Model 3B Plus from my parts bin, a tiny, versatile single-board computer. I had connected it to my network via Ethernet, placing it strategically near the compromised section of the wall. Then came the deep dive into my router's configuration. I flashed it with custom open-source firmware, DDWRT, granting me granular, command-line level control far beyond the standard user interface. First, one meticulously identified the unique digital fingerprint of her hidden range extender, its consistent handshake protocols, its broadcast signature, even the specific way it negotiated connection parameters. Then, I crafted a script. Python, elegant in its simplicity, brutal in its application. The script's logic was straightforward. Continuously monitor network traffic for the specific connection signature of Carolyn's hidden extender. Upon detecting active data transfer associated with her device, confirming she wasn't just passively connected but actively using the stolen bandwidth, trigger the Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi's task, packet injection. Intercept data packets destined for her extender before they reached it. Inject carefully crafted malicious packets in their place. These injected packets contained audio data, a curated, looping library of the most grating, high-pitched, neurologically irritating parrot squawks and phrases downloadable from the internet. AWK, Polly want a cracker. Squawk, pretty bird, bad bird. Squawk, awk. Volume normalized to be piercing but not physically damaging. The crucial part, this interference wouldn't jam her signal. It would hijack the very signal she was stealing to deliver her own personalized auditory hell. The squawks would manifest only on her end, erupting from the speakers of whatever device she was using, laptop, tablet, smart TV, while connected through my compromised network. The moment she disconnected, silence. Reconnect. The avian symphony resumed, and, critically for later, my system meticulously logged everything, every time her device connected. The duration, the bandwidth consumed, and crucially, every time-stamped instance the Parrot payload was deployed. Digital breadcrumbs leading directly back to her transgression. I ran a quick, isolated test. I configured a spare burner laptop to mimic the MAC address and connection signature of her extender. I connected it to my network. The script fired. The sudden, violent eruption of squawk, pretty bird, AWKBAD bird, from the laptop's speakers was startlingly effective, intensely annoying, deeply satisfying. I disabled the test, carefully patched the tiny hole in the drywall with a near-invisible touch of paint, slid the heavy entertainment center back into place, reconnected my legitimate systems, and waited. The trap, baited with bandwidth and feathered with fury, was set. The wait was surprisingly short. Later that same night, around 10:15 p.m., according to the logs that began populating almost immediately, my network monitoring software flashed an alert.dev signature match. Carolyn extender active, bandwidth pull detected. My script executed flawlessly. Payload deployed, Parrot audio injection Vone.2. Silence. I held my breath, pressing my ear against the cool plaster of the shared wall. Faintly, almost imperceptibly at first, filtering through the insulation and studs, a muffled AWK. It was followed by a distinctly frustrated groan from her side. Then, silence again for several minutes. My monitor showed her device disconnected. Then, reconnection attempt detected. Bandwidth pull confirmed. Payload deployed. Faintly through the wall, Polly won a cracker. Squawk. This time, it was followed by a louder, clearly audible exclamation from Carolyn. What is that infernal noise? A slow, cold, grim smile spread across my face in the dim glow of my monitors. Game on. Carolyn. Welcome to the jungle. The following week unfolded like a carefully orchestrated psychological operation, soundtracked by muffled avian chaos. Carolyn's internet usage patterns solidified, mostly evenings, often late into the night, presumably after she thought I was asleep, and every single time her hidden extender latched onto my network, the digital parrots descended. Life next door became a series of eavesdropped vignettes of escalating frustration. I'd hear snippets of her increasingly agitated phone calls drifting through the thin wall. No, Agnes. I don't have a bloody bird. It's the computer. It just squawks at me. A pause, filled with what I imagined was bewildered silence on the other end. No, not buffering. Actual squawking, like a demon parrot possessed by static. Another evening. The unmistakable cadence of a video call. Brenda. Brenda. Brenda, can you hear me over this racket? My laptop's gone completely mad. AWK. Pretty bird. See? It just did it again. Polly won a cracker. Oh, for heaven's sake, shut up. You stupid machine. This was followed by the distinct, sharp thwack of what sounded very much like a laptop lid being slammed shut with considerable force. She tried troubleshooting, loudly and performatively. I heard her muttering about viruses, malware, Russian hackers. The frantic clicking of keys suggested antivirus scans being run repeatedly. The genius of my system, of course, was its ephemeral nature. It wasn't malware on her devices. It was network-level packet injection tied directly and solely to her unauthorized access of my specific network via that extender. Disconnect from my Wi-Fi. Blessed silence. Reconnect. Instant Parrot-geddon. The cause and effect were intrinsically linked to her theft. She started ambushing me again, but her tone had shifted. The aggressive entitlement was overlaid with a thin veneer of desperation. She cornered me by the recycling bins one morning, wringing her hands. Ben, dear, you're terribly clever with these computer things, aren't you? The sudden dear was almost comical. I know my way around them, I replied cautiously, maintaining perfect, innocent ignorance. What's up? Carolyn, my internet. She practically wailed, her voice cracking. It's worse than ever. It's gone completely haywire. It's not just slow anymore. Now it's noisy. Noisy. I furrowed my brow, feigning deep concentration. How do you mean? Like electrical interference, humming, static. No, worse, like birds, parrots, horrible squawking and talking, only when I try to go online. It's driving me absolutely bonkers. Have you noticed any strange interference? Radio waves, maybe from all your specialized equipment. She waved a hand vaguely towards my unit, suspicion warring with her plea for help. Parrots. The first widened my eyes, injecting maximum bafflement into my voice. That's incredibly bizarre, Carolyn. Never heard of anything remotely like that. Are you absolutely positive it's electronic? Couldn't it be coming from outside? Maybe Miss S. Gable down the row finally got that macaw she was talking about. I deliberately deflected, planting seeds of external possibilities. She scowled, unconvinced, but clearly grasping at straws. No. It's definitely the computer or the tablet, only when I'm connected. Maybe someone nearby is using one of those illegal signal jammer things. Her eyes held a hopeful gleam. Perhaps another neighbor was the culprit. Signal jammers. I shook my head gravely. Highly illegal. Carolyn. Serious federal offense. And they typically just block signals entirely. Make everything dead. They don't usually make devices squawk like possessed parrots. Honestly, it sounds much more like a hardware fault on your end. Maybe your speakers are malfunctioning, picking up weird, off frequencies, or perhaps a strange browser plugin you accidentally installed. I offered plausible, mundane explanations, watching her internal gears grind. She looked profoundly stumped, her frustration palpable. Maybe, she muttered uncertainly, shuffling away defeated, leaving me to savor the quiet, exquisite satisfaction of my precisely targeted, avian-themed digital retribution. The log files continued to grow, a meticulous, time-stamped indictment of her every transgression. Each stolen kilobyte, each triggered squawk was another brick in the wall of evidence I was building. The inevitable breaking point arrived, as I suspected it might, during the monthly Maplewood Creek HOA board meeting, conducted, naturally, via Zoom, as treasurer. Carolyn's attendance and active participation were non-negotiable. I knew the meeting schedule well. That Tuesday evening, I settled onto my sofa, ostensibly relaxing but keenly monitoring my network dashboard. My Parrot Squawk Interceptor V.2 1.2 script was armed and waiting, right on schedule. Mere moments after 7:00 p.m. As the meeting likely commenced, I could hear the faint, tinny drone of indistinct voices through the wall. My monitor flashed the familiar alert, device signature match, Carolyn extender active, bandwidth draw confirmed, script triggered, payload deployed. Through the thin barrier of drywall, I listened intently. The muffled voice of George Peterson, the HOA president, presumably opening the meeting. Then Carolyn's voice, tight with a forced, artificial professionalism I now recognized all too well. Thank you, George. Regarding the proposed increase in the landscaping budget for Q3, her sentence was abruptly, brutally cut off by a loud, startlingly clear squawk, bad bird, awk, filtering through the wall. I could almost feel the stunned silence on the other end of her Zoom call. Then Carolyn, flustered, voice tight with embarrassment. I do apologize. Seemed to be having some technical difficulties. Just one moment, pause. Right, as I was saying, the budget allocation, wholly want a cracker. AWK, squawk, pretty bird, awk. The digital parrot was merciless, its timing impeccable, shredding her composure with each electronic screech. I heard muffled cursing from her side, the frantic clatter of keyboard keys being mashed, followed by more insistent squawks. The beautiful chaos continued for several agonizing minutes, for her, at least. Muffled sounds suggested others on the call were trying to speak over the noise. Then perhaps someone muted her microphone remotely. Or maybe she simply fled the virtual meeting in utter disgrace. The sounds emanating from her townhouse shifted from digital bird cries to pure, unadulterated human rage. A door slammed with enough force to rattle our shared wall. A high-pitched shriek of pure frustration echoed faintly. Then, an abrupt, heavy, ominous silence. My own silence was one of grim satisfaction. Checkmate delivered via packet injection. A few minutes later, maybe 5, my doorbell didn't ring. It was assaulted. A frantic, insistent, repeated mashing of the button, jarring in the evening quiet. I glanced through the peephole. Predictably, it was Carolyn. Her face was flushed a dangerous shade of crimson, her blonde helmet slightly askew, eyes blazing with incoherent fury. This was it, the confrontation. Showtime. Taking a deliberate, calming breath, I smoothed my expression into one of neutral, slightly concerned neighborliness. I opened the door. Carolyn, everything okay? I asked. My voice pitched with mild curiosity. Sounded like quite a commotion over there during the meeting. Okay, she shrieked. Any vestige of neighborly pretense incinerated in her fury. Her voice was raw, cracking. No. Ben Carter, it is not okay. Your signals, your infernal machines, they are deliberately interfering with my electronics. You did this. You sabotaged my meeting. Those noises, those parrots, it was you. Whoa. Carolyn, slow down, I said calmly, taking a deliberate step onto my own porch, positioning myself slightly so any potentially watching neighbors would witness my composure against her meltdown. Deep breaths. What are you talking about? Parrots again. Are you still hearing those noises? I kept my tone reasonable. Slightly bewildered. Don't you dare play dumb with me, she spat, jabbing a trembling finger towards my living room window. It only happens when I'm online. It's your fault. Your giant computers and servers, and God knows what else you have crammed in there. You're blasting illegal interference. I'm reporting you. It's against the law. Illegal. The first repeated the word, letting my voice drop, allowing a note of cold steel to enter my tone. We were moving to the endgame. That's an interesting choice of word, Carolyn. Shall we talk about what's actually illegal? Like, for instance, criminal property damage, unauthorized access, maybe drilling holes through shared structural walls. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Her eyes widened dramatically. The crimson flush drained from her face, leaving it pasty white beneath her makeup. She recoiled slightly. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, the denial weak. unconvincing even to her own ears. "Oh, I think you do," I said, maintaining eye contact. Letting the silence stretch for a beat, I held up a hand. "Stay right there." I turned, walked calmly back inside, leaving her standing stunned on my porch. I retrieved my smartphone. Returning to the doorway, I pulled up the crystal clear photos I'd taken just hours before, the small, neat hole in the drywall behind my entertainment center. The yellow insulation pulled back, the white Wi-Fi extender nestled within the wall cavity, its cable snaking away towards her side. I held the phone out, screen illuminated, angled so she couldn't possibly miss the detail. Recognize this charming piece of home modification. "Carolyn," I asked, my voice dangerously quiet now. "That's the inside of the load-bearing wall between our living rooms. And that little device, that's a Wi-Fi range extender. Your Wi-Fi extender, I believe. The one you surreptitiously installed inside my wall to steal my internet connection." Carolyn stared at the photos, her mouth opening and closing silently. The fight visibly drained out of her, replaced by a dawning, sickening realization. She was caught. Utterly, comprehensively caught. And the parrots? I pressed on, relentless. That wasn't interference. That was a targeted network security measure I implemented myself. A little auditory alert system. It only activated when your specific device, the one hidden in that wall, connected to my network without authorization. Every single squawk, every poly want a cracker that drove you insane, was audible. Time-stamped proof that you were actively stealing my service at that exact moment. I swiped on my phone, showing her a glimpse of the meticulously compiled connection logs, rows upon rows of data, timestamps, bandwidth usage, and Parrot payload deployed entries, irrefutable, undeniable. I have logs documenting every intrusion. Carolyn, every single time, correlating your illegal access directly with the parrot sounds you found so irritating. She finally found her voice again, but it was unrecognizable, weak, trembling, pathetic. You can't prove that. It could be a coincidence. Faulty wiring. It's not faulty wiring, and it's not a coincidence, I stated flatly. The last vestiges of neighborly tolerance gone, replaced by cold, hard finality. It's theft of service. It's criminal property damage. It's felony unauthorized access under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And I have all the evidence I need. I lowered my phone, pocketing it. The parrot stopped now. Carolyn, permanently. Because you will never access my network again. And now, we need to have a serious discussion about arranging professional repairs for the structural damage you caused to the wall. And, of course, about reporting this entire matter to the appropriate authorities. The fight completely evaporated. The fury, the denial, all gone. Replaced by raw, naked fear flickering in her wide eyes. She understood the gravity. She knew she was cornered, exposed, with digital and physical evidence forming an inescapable cage around her. "No, please," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper, tears welling up. "Please. Ben, don't report it. It was just a stupid mistake. My internet was so unreliable. I wasn't thinking. You didn't think you'd get caught." I finished for her, my voice devoid of sympathy. "You deliberately drilled through a structural wall. Carolyn, you damaged property that isn't solely yours. You methodically stole service for weeks, possibly months, while simultaneously complaining and casting blame. That isn't a stupid mistake. That's a series of calculated criminal acts, and actions, as they say, have consequences." I held her gaze for another long moment, letting the weight of her predicament settle upon her. Then, I stepped back inside and closed the door firmly in her face, the solid click echoing the finality of the situation. I leaned against the door for a moment, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving behind a residue of grim satisfaction mixed with a strange sense of weariness. The battle was won, the evidence secured. Carolyn Vance's reign of annoying, entitled, bandwidth thieving behavior was officially, irrevocably over. The phantom squawks of digital parrots seemed to echo faintly, not from the wall, but from the quiet corners of my own vindicated mind. The following morning, armed with my meticulously documented evidence, I initiated the formal proceedings. My first stop was the local police department. I filed a detailed report outlining the criminal property damage, emphasizing the breach of a shared structural wall and the theft of internet service, theft of services, under state statute. I met with Officer Brennan, a calm, methodical patrolman who listened patiently, his expression shifting from mild skepticism to professional seriousness as I presented the evidence. High-resolution photographs of the hole and the embedded extender, printouts of the network logs showing the consistent intrusion patterns and MAC address of her device, and a clear, concise explanation of how I technically confirmed the intrusion originated from her unit and correlated directly with the theft. Officer Brennan acknowledged that prosecuting simple Wi-Fi piggybacking could be challenging, often treated as a low-level offense. However, the physical drilling and damage to the property, combined with the clear evidence of unauthorized access via hardware installed within the wall, elevated the matter significantly. He took copious notes, collected copies of my evidence, and assured me a detective would likely follow up, given the property damage aspect. My second call was to George Peterson, the HOA president. I requested an urgent confidential meeting, bypassing any further interaction with Carolyn. In George's small, tidy office at his accounting firm, I laid out the entire situation, mirroring the presentation I'd given Officer Brennan. George listened, his face growing increasingly pale and appalled. Damaging shared structural elements was a cardinal sin in HOA governance, carrying significant liability for the association. The theft was bad enough, but the fact that the perpetrator was the HOA treasurer, a position demanding utmost trust and ethical conduct, made the situation catastrophic. "This is deeply disturbing, Ben," he said, adjusting his glasses. "This requires immediate board action. Thank you for bringing this to us directly and with such thorough documentation." Carolyn, when confronted separately first by Officer Brennan and then by George Peterson, representing the HOA board, predictably attempted a campaign of outright denial. She claimed ignorance of the hole. "It must have been there when I moved in. Poor construction." She disavowed the extender. "That's not mine. Maybe the previous owner left it." She dismissed my network logs as fabricated. "He's a computer expert. He could make them say anything. He's harassing me because I complained about his noise." Her flimsy denials disintegrated rapidly under scrutiny. Based on my evidence establishing probable cause property damage originating from her side, unauthorized access traced to her unit, the police obtained a straightforward warrant to inspect the interior of her side of the shared wall. The inspection was brief and damning. They found the other end of the neatly drilled hole, cleverly concealed behind a section of baseboard that had been subtly loosened and reattached. They confirmed the power cable snaked directly from the hidden extender to one of her electrical outlets. Her fingerprints were likely all over the device itself. The physical evidence was irrefutable. The HOA board convened an emergency executive session excluding Carolyn, naturally, presented with the police findings and my evidence. The verdict was swift and unanimous. Carolyn Vance was immediately and summarily removed from her position as treasurer and stripped of all board duties. They levied the maximum allowable fines under the HOA covenants for the severe property damage, the rule violations, and her deliberate dishonesty during the inquiry. Furthermore, she was issued a formal notice requiring her to pay, in full, for professional repairs to the shared wall by a licensed and bonded contractor, chosen and supervised by the HOA management company, within 30 days. But the repercussions were far from over. Officer Brennan's detailed report, highlighting the calculated nature of the physical breach and the unauthorized network access, landed on the desk of Detective Isabella Izzy Rossi. Yes, the same Izzy from the previous story. Having transferred into the burgeoning cybercrimes unit, the universe enjoys its little coincidences. While simple bandwidth theft might have resulted only in misdemeanor charges for theft of service and criminal mischief for the wall damage, Izzy's instincts told her there might be more. Why go to the extreme? Risky length of drilling through a wall and spoofing MAC addresses just to browse Facebook faster. What was Carolyn really doing with that stolen, anonymized internet connection? Izzy spearheaded a deeper dive, a second warrant, based on the confirmed illegal access and potential for further criminal activity conducted via the compromised network, allowed for a forensic examination of the recovered Wi-Fi extender and Carolyn's primary computer and tablet. The results were revealing, and far darker than simple web browsing. Carolyn, it turned out, had been leveraging my stolen, effectively untraceable internet connection for a sustained campaign of targeted online harassment against another HOA board member, a woman with whom she had a long-standing, bitter rivalry. Using anonymous email accounts and proxy servers accessed via my network, Carolyn had sent threatening messages and posted vile, defamatory comments about her rival on local community forums and neighborhood social media groups. My IP address, unwittingly, was the launchpad for her vitriol. Furthermore, the digital investigation uncovered alarming irregularities flagged during a preliminary review of the HOA Treasury records conducted after her removal. Small but consistent discrepancies emerged, vaguely described vendor payments, invoices paid to companies with no verifiable business registration or history of services rendered. It smacked of potential embezzlement, carefully masked by her exclusive control over the HOA's financial accounts and her ability to authorize payments. Her desperate, technically risky need for reliable, untraceable internet access suddenly clicked into a much more sinister context. She wasn't just stealing Wi-Fi, she was potentially using it as a tool to facilitate and conceal other crimes. The investigation rapidly snowballed. The documented online harassment led to state charges for cyberstalking and potentially federal charges under statutes addressing threats transmitted across state lines via internet infrastructure. The clear financial irregularities triggered a full, independent forensic audit of the HOA's accounts during Carolyn's entire tenure as treasurer. The audit revealed a systematic pattern of embezzlement. Carolyn had been skimming funds for well over a year, diverting small, seemingly insignificant amounts from various budget lines into personal accounts, often routed through obscure online payment processors or disguised as legitimate vendor payments. All financial transactions likely conducted and managed online. Hidden behind the anonymity afforded by my stolen internet connection, what began as a neighborly dispute over noise and bandwidth escalated by a bizarre act of physical intrusion, metastasized into a complex criminal case encompassing property damage, theft of service, violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act for the unauthorized access used to commit harassment, felony wire fraud related to the embezzlement scheme conducted across internet lines, cyberstalking, and additional charges for perjury stemming from her initial false statements to investigators. The sheer, almost comical stupidity of drilling a physical hole, combined with the damning digital breadcrumbs she inadvertently left behind via the extender and her own devices, sealed her fate. Facing an insurmountable mountain of digital, financial, and physical evidence, and the prospect of multiple sequential prison sentences if convicted on all counts at trial, Carolyn Vance eventually accepted a comprehensive plea bargain. She pleaded guilty to several felony counts, including wire fraud and cyberstalking. The judge, citing the egregious breach of fiduciary trust as HOA treasurer, the malicious and calculated nature of the online harassment campaign, the methodical embezzlement scheme, and the brazen property destruction and theft from her neighbor, was not inclined towards leniency. Carolyn Vance was sentenced to serve 3 years in state prison. Additionally, she was ordered to pay full restitution to the Maplewood Creek HOA for the embezzled funds amounting to nearly $15.0 and substantial compensatory damages to me for the wall repair, the stolen service value, and punitive damages related to the invasive nature of the crime. Significant liens were placed on her townhouse by the court to ensure the restitution and damages were eventually paid. The day Carolyn Vance, stripped of her entitled facade, was quietly escorted from the courtroom in handcuffs to begin her sentence. A palpable sense of weary relief settled over Maplewood Creek. There were no celebrations, no outward displays of vindication, just the quiet turning of a sordid page. Her townhouse sat empty and silent for months, ensnared in legal forfeiture proceedings and lien settlements, before finally being sold at a county auction to partially satisfy her debts. The HOA, chastened and wiser, hired a reputable external accounting firm, implemented stringent new financial controls with mandatory dual sign-offs, and elected a new treasurer known throughout the community for his meticulous, almost obsessive honesty. The shared wall was professionally repaired, the drywall seamless, the paint perfectly matched. The physical scar vanished, but a psychological one remained. I invested heavily in upgrading my home network security yet again, implementing enterprise-grade firewalls, network segmentation, intrusion detection systems, and regular vulnerability scanning. My home fortress was now truly fortified. Peace gradually returned to my small slice of Maplewood Creek, the ambient sounds no longer carrying the phantom echo of parrot squawks or the imagined scratch of a drill bit. But sometimes, late at night, sitting in my quiet living room, my gaze would drift towards that repaired section of wall, a perfectly smooth, unremarkable surface. Yet, I knew what lay beneath: the memory of the violation, the physical proximity of betrayal. Living shoulder to shoulder always carries inherent risks, proximity breeding friction as easily as friendship. Carolyn's saga, however, was a uniquely bizarre and potent cautionary tale, a chilling reminder hammered home with the force of a drill bit. Sometimes, the most dangerous threats aren't lurking anonymous thousands of miles away in the vast, dark corners of cyberspace. Sometimes, they're living just inches away, breathing the same air, armed with a power drill, a cheap Wi-Fi extender, and a bottomless well of misplaced entitlement. The digital parrots had fallen silent, their mission accomplished. But their spectral echo served as a permanent reminder: trust, but verify, especially when your neighbor complains about their internet speed.